If you're listening to this right now, I'm going to bet there's a pretty good chance you started your day with a cup of coffee.
Oh, almost certainly. Or you're in the middle of one right now.
Exactly. It's arguably the most universal social lubricant we have on the planet. But if you try to trace where that ritual comes from, not just the plant, but the actual culture of it.
Mm-hmm. The meeting, the discussing.
Right. We have to go way past the familiar European cafes and ask, where did the social need for coffee really begin?
And that really is the core question, isn't it? We all kind of know the plant itself, Coffea arabica, has its roots deep in the Ethiopian highlands. But the sources you shared, they reveal something else. The whole process of turning that wild fruit into a formal global commodity.
With specific growing techniques, a spiritual angle, trade routes.
All of it. That story, it seems, belongs firmly to 15th century Yemen.
Absolutely. So that's our deep dive today. We're going to unpack how this humble bean, first used by Muslim Sufi mystics in the 1400s, how it evolved into this strategically guarded global monopoly, and then how it became the template for the intellectual cafe culture that, really defines the modern world.
And this transition wasn't an accident. It wasn't military conquest or anything like that. I think the first, most essential thing to grasp is that the formalization of coffee was driven by faith, not profit. Not at first. It was the Muslim world, specifically the Sufis in Yemen, who took this wild plant, cultivated it, and turned it into the world's first truly global cash crop.
Okay, so let's get into that journey. We know the plants are from Ethiopia, but the actual transfer, that happens around the mid-15th century. The historical accounts seem to point to traders, right? Somali merchants from ports like Berbera and Zayla.
That's right. They're the ones bringing the raw seeds and beans across that narrow strip of the Red Sea and into Yemen. And what's so fascinating is how quickly and how intensely it was adopted in Yemen. The environment was just perfect for it.
For the Arabica strain specifically?
Exactly. The high altitude, the unique microclimates in those mountainous regions. But the reason it took hold so fast, that was entirely spiritual.
Yes, the Yemeni Sufis. They adopted coffee as a tool for devotion. It was a spiritual necessity.
A necessity. How so?
They needed to stay awake, to maintain focus during these very long late-night prayer and chanting sessions. They're called dhikr.
Right. I mean, you have to imagine the intensity of that ritual. It's continuous prayer, chanting, maybe movement, often from dusk all the way until dawn.
So it wasn't a leisure drink, not at all.
No, it was an enhancer, a way to sustain that spiritual practice and stay present.
Right.
When you frame it like that, that coffee came from a need to sustain faith. It just changes the whole story.
It was sacred fuel.
It really was.
And to go from that personal spiritual practice to a regional staple, that must have required some serious organization. I mean, wasn't Yemen already using other stimulants? They had qahwa, right?
That's a great point. They did. And qahwa remains a big deal there. It's a mild stimulant leaf that people chew.
So why coffee then? Why did it take over?
Well, qahwa gives you a kind of slow, mild high. Coffee, especially when they prepared it in this ritualistic way, it offered something sharper, more focused. It fit the need better. And that commitment to it was so serious, it actually became state policy. We see this really clearly in 1544.
What happened then?
The local imam declared that coffee cultivation was superior to qahwa, and he actively pushed for its development.
Wow. So that's the moment. That one decision reshapes their entire economy. You're shifting all these resources toward this new crop.
A crop that's really difficult to grow, right?
Incredibly difficult.
Well, it's not like farming on flat plains.
To grow Arabica beans well, they had to use these complex terraced hillsides.
So they're engineering the landscape.
Precisely. Sophisticated, narrow terraces designed to manage water, to maximize the yield in this really challenging terrain.
Right.
This wasn't just, picking a wild plant anymore.
No, they were meticulously cultivating it, turning a wild fruit into a highly controlled, high-value crop that was central to their whole identity. And that meticulous cultivation, it very quickly translated into this just astonishing trade empire. And it was all built around a single port, Mocha, or Al-Maka on the Red Sea coast.
Mocha. By the late 15th century, that port became the caffeinated heart of the global economy.
Absolutely. If you wanted the best, purest coffee in the world, The original Arabica that the Sufis had perfected. You had to go through mocha.
What's so unique here is the deliberate, strategic control they had over it. It wasn't just a monopoly because they were the only ones who had it.
No, it was an intellectual property monopoly, and they guarded it fiercely.
It was basically corporate espionage hundreds of years before corporations even existed.
It was. The sources all highlight this key strategy,
Yeah.
protecting the viable seed.
So it wasn't just tariffs.
Not at all. They went to extraordinary lengths to make sure no live germinable seed ever left Yemen.
So just imagine that. Before any beans leave the port of Mocha on a ship, they were either boiled or dry roasted.
They were sterilizing them. On purpose. This strategic control meant the only thing being created was a finished product, something you couldn't replicate.
That shows such a profound understanding of botany, of economics.
Oh, absolutely. They knew as long as we control the living seed, we control the price, the quality, the entire global supply chain.
So the families tending those plants on the terraces, they weren't just farmers.
No, they were guardians. Guardians of the world's most valuable secret. And the word mocha became the gold standard, you know. It meant quality, it meant origin.
A term we still use today.
Exactly. All because of that 2-century-long chokehold they had on the market.
So the moment coffee leaves the monasteries, hits the port of Mocha, it just explodes into public life.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the Cultural Revolution really kicks off. Coffee becomes this ultimate social catalyst.
It moves from the port into all the big cities of the Islamic world. In the early 16th century, the Clave Khane, the coffee house, starts popping up everywhere.
In places like Mecca, Cairo, Aleppo.
And eventually Istanbul, major hubs.
And these places were, well, they were revolutionary, weren't they? They weren't taverns. They weren't private clubs.
Not at all. They became these vital centers for non-religious, non-governmental public life. Some accounts from the time called them schools of the wise.
Schools of the wise.
I love that. And if you look at what they were for, it's pretty clear they seeded the global cafe culture we have today. This is where news was shared.
Which is crucial in a world without any mass media.
Right. It's where poetry was recited, music was played, and critically, where public debate and intellectual discourse just flourished.
And it was all fueled by the stimulant in the coffee.
Of course.
You can just picture it, can't you? People gathered, sipping this dark brew, talking about the latest news, maybe even criticizing the local government.
And that, of course, created a problem for the authority.
A big problem.
This new coffee house created a third space. It wasn't the mosque and it wasn't the palace.
It was independent, intellectual, and probably prone to dissent.
Exactly. And that's why the initial controversy was so fierce. Some conservative theologians tried to ban coffee completely.
On what grounds?
They'd declare it intoxicating or argue that it encouraged, laziness and sedition.
That raises a really interesting question. If they were trying to ban it in the early 16th century, how popular must it have already been for those bans to fail?
It was already socially indispensable. That's the thing. It was part of trade, intellectual life, daily routine. The issue got so big that the leadership had to step in at the very highest level.
And who resolved it?
The Ottoman Sultan, Suleiman I, and his chief legal authority, the Grand Mufti Ibn Saud. They actually issued a fatwa, a legal ruling permitting its use.
That's a landmark moment. It's
Yeah.
not just them turning a blind eye. It's an official, religious, and legal stamp of approval.
It affirmed the legitimacy of this whole new social space, and that just allowed the Cultural Revolution to keep spreading.
And once it was permitted,
The flow was unstoppable. From Yemen and Mecca, it moves to Persia, Syria, all across the Ottoman Empire. Istanbul gets its first coffee house around 1554. And with that, coffee culture is officially at the heart of one of the world's great empires.
so the coffee revolution has now completely taken over the Middle East. But the real global shift happens when Europeans discover it through the Ottoman trade routes.
Right. And they realize the immense economic potential if only they could break that Yemeni monopoly.
And by the early 17th century, the beans are making their way into Europe.
Through trading powerhouses like Venice. Venice opens its first official coffee house in 1647, kind of like the gateway to the continent.
And from there, it just spreads. London, Paris. By the late 17th century, it's everywhere.
But the only way for the European colonial powers to really profit from this was to stop buying expensive imports from Mocha.
They had to get their hands on a living seed.
Which turns this into one of history's great stories of industrial espionage.
And the most famous story the sources point to is Baba Budan, the Sufi saint.
Right. Around 1670, he pulls off this incredible act of high-stakes smuggling.
He reportedly strapped 7 viable unroasted coffee beans to his chest.
7 being a sacred number.
Right, and he carries them all the way from Yemen to India.
7 beans. That one single act, it essentially ends a 200-year monopoly, even if the impact wasn't immediate.
That handful of beans starts all cultivation outside the Arab world.
And those 7 beans were soon followed by, well, more organized efforts. The Dutch
They were
traders,
incredibly aggressive.
they managed to get seeds and establish huge plantations in their colonies, especially in Java, modern-day Indonesia.
And then the French followed, taking their own seeds to Martinique and the Caribbean.
And that push into the equatorial colonies powered by European empires is what fundamentally redraws the map. Coffee goes from the terraced hills of Yemen to all throughout Latin America in the 18th century.
Once those seeds were out, the unique value of the Yemeni crop, cultivated with so much care and spiritual history,
It lost its strategic edge. The original source was now just one producer among many, competing against these massive colonial-scale plantations.
which brings us to the great irony where it gets really interesting, the rebranding.
The rebranding, yes.
By the 18th century, European coffee houses are completely entrenched. You've got the English penny university.
Where you paid a penny for a coffee and got access to all this intellectual debate, pamphlets, networking.
But if you compare that penny university to the Middle Eastern kavehkhane,
The blueprint is identical. The purpose is the same. Social exchange, intellectual stimulation, political discourse.
but the origin story gets completely erased.
It does. The European narrative focuses on reason, enlightenment, commerce.
Forgetting that the whole mechanism, the brewing, the roasting, the trade networks, even the word coffee itself,
From the Arabic qahwa.
right, all of it was perfected and exported by the Islamic world. Without the Sufi devotion and that meticulous Yemeni craft, there would be no modern cafe culture, period.
So, at the end of the day, what does this whole trajectory mean for us now? I mean, the synthesis is really powerful. Coffee's formalization as a global product was entirely achieved by the Muslim world, specifically Yemen,
And its foundation was spiritual, a tool for prayer.
which then enabled the rise of the strategic trade empire of Mocha. And that empire, in turn, gave the world the intellectual and social blueprint for the coffee house.
It's just a compelling reminder of how deep cultural practices, when they merge with strategic innovation, can completely reshape the world. It started as a companion to prayer, it became a protected treasure, and then ultimately the engine of global social diplomacy.
And what the sources make tragically clear is the economic fallout from that loss of control.
Yeah.
Yemen guarded its monopoly for centuries, but once those few seeds escaped, the heartland of coffee cultivation lost its economic power forever to all the colonial ventures that came next.
And I think that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to take away from this. The next time you're holding a warm cup of coffee, you are connecting with a legacy that is so much more than just a beverage. You're participating in a history that shaped the modern world. A history rooted in devotion, guarded fiercely, and ultimately smuggled out of the terraced hills of Yemen.
And maybe that history changes how you taste that morning cup. Reminds you that innovation, once it's lost, rarely returns to its source.
That connection, that rich origin, that's a history worth tasting and worth remembering.